Hi, Ed Collab Gathering, and hello, Teacher Poets. Here we are in what is two things happening at the same time. We have the final session of Teacher Poets. We also are in session 1, workshop 3 of the Educator Collaborative. So to make things easy, so we don't have too many things going on, you are welcome to use hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering. You could use number 3 if you'd like. But what we'll mainly focus on is hashtag teacher poets. So if you need to drop hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering during this session because it's less things to type, you're welcome to just use hashtag teacher poets. We decided that it takes up a little too much Twitter real estate to try to do both. So if you have been along with us for Teacher Poets before, like I see Carol's joining us, hi Carol, or if you haven't, here are a couple of things to help you be ready for our session today, some of which was some homework to do ahead of time, but it's honestly homework you could do even quickly right now. So we've met for the past 3 Saturdays. This is our 3rd and final session together. Like I said, you're welcome to live tweet using hashtag Teacher Poets. We also live together on our Google Plus community page. You can follow that link or you can scan that QR code. And this session, like all of our sessions, will be archived. So if you missed that link, you can always come back and check it out later. So each week we've had an assignment, some writing invitations, some things to read or write. So for today and for all of our sessions, our assignments were posted at community.theeducatorcollaborative.com/blog, and there you'll find all of our sessions, including the homework for today. And so there was a writing invitation. The writing invitation this week was to use last week's strategy that we tried to tell it like it is not, and for you to experiment with writing some poems or drafts of poems. We also, for today, asked you to read some mentor poems. There's The Space Heater by Sharon Olds, Daddy Dozens by Jamila Woods, and Hurry by Marie Howe. And all of those are to help us think about today's theme, which we'll talk about in a second. Then the most important thing of all, so if you're joining us and you've never been a teacher poet before, here is your chance to get involved in something that I think is probably the highlight of everything we do, and that is to read 2 original poems by 2 of our teacher poets here today, which we will workshop later. So those are Deadline by Jancy, hi Jancy, and Jen has an untitled poem. She was working with, I think Vulture was like somewhere in there, but that was one of the things she said is she'd love some thoughts on titles too. So Jen's untitled poem. Both are available at community.theeducatorcollaborative.com/blog. It's actually the first blog post that's up right now when you log in. And what you could do is download both of these poems and write all over them. So when you read and mark them up, you can write compliments, you can write questions, and you also can write some considerations for the poet. And we'll go through those later today, so you'll have more of an introduction as to what we're doing. But we invite you to visit our blog if you haven't already, download those 2 original poems, and jot some questions, compliments, and considerations that'll help us as we workshop later today. So for our session today, we generally start by talking about some of the mentor poems that we read. Then that leads into some strategies a strategy that we'll do together, and then we'll workshop. So our strategy today is tell us to turn. And what I mean by this is we've been talking about along the way how important it is to not be too mysterious. And granted, some poems do that. You're welcome to do that. But for our work here, we're thinking about not being too mysterious in your writing to help your readers know exactly who you're talking about or what you're talking about. You could even come right out and say it. Then we added a layer to that of then being inventive as the poem moves on. So you might introduce the idea that you're in a fight with your mother, let's say, and as the poem moves on, then you could make some surprising or interesting moves with your language or some comparisons that you'll make there. Today, what we'll be looking at and then talking about is, again, guiding your reader through some turns in your poem or places where the poem takes a detour that you didn't expect. You go to a new place or a new time or a new idea. So we have some mentor poems that we were reading for today that can help us think about that theme of how poets help us to make those turns. And so I'd like to start a conversation about those. We could jump into any of them, and then we'll do some writing work together to work on some turns. So all of the poems are available free online, but we also very much respect copyright law here, so I'm not going to put up any of the poems, but I will take some snippets from them. So from the poems that we suggested you read today, the interesting thing is, by accident, they all revolve around like parents. Like there's a part where it's like about a dad or about a mom or something, which part of me was like, is that just because that's what's in my mind? But then the more poems I was looking for, I was like, oh, but it also is like, that's what lots of poets deal with, is like parent issues. So for whatever reason, they all seem to be somewhat parent-related. But we have Marie Howe's poem, Hurry, where she starts out the poem like this: we stop at the dry cleaners and the grocery store and the gas station and the green market, and hurry up, honey, I say, hurry, and she runs along 2 or 3 steps behind me. So in her poem, she starts with this image of what I'm imagining is like a daughter and a mom, and the mom's making her run, run, run. But then by the end, she makes this turn where now the daughter is the one who's running ahead in almost a playful way, but she's running ahead and telling her mom to run too. Then we have Daddy Dozens by Jamila Woods, which starts, my daddy's forehead is so big, we don't need a dining room table. My daddy's forehead so big, his hat size is equator. So big, it's a 5 head. Tyra Banks burst into tears when she seen my daddy's forehead. And so it's all of these kind of like knocks on daddy as we go through. But then a point turns where she starts to say things like, my daddy's so smart, he performed surgery on his own ingrown toenail. Mama not impressed, but my daddy got brains. My daddy know exactly how to drive me to my friend's house without looking, no nap at all. And by the end of the poem, you start to learn about the speaker's father as being someone who's smart, loves his family, but is working so much that it's almost that he's too far away. It ends with, my house got its own forehead, glinting, sweaty in the evening, while my daddy at work at home in his own area code, a whole other time zone. So it's this interesting turn of really funny to all of a sudden much more serious by the end. And then Space Heater by Sharon Olds describes a speaker who is with a therapist and is sharing all these ideas, all these thoughts with a therapist, and then gets annoyed because the space heater isn't on and it's too cold. So she keeps trying to like acknowledge that we have to turn the space heater on. And so finally the therapist gets up to change the space heater, and she sees how hard it is for the therapist to actually like move and get over there. And so she has this moment where she says, let's see, I was so moved that he would act undignified to help me that I cried, and trying to stop, but as if the moans made sentences which bore some human message, if he would cast himself toward the outlet for me, as if bending with me in my old shame and horror, then I would rest on his art, and the heater purred, like a creature, or the familiar of a creature, or the child of a familiar, the father of a child, the spirit of a father. And so she ends with this like, suddenly she's surprised that he had such a hard time getting over there, and then she just bursts into tears, or the speaker burst into tears noticing this. So I'd love to hear from all of you. What are things that you noticed about how these poets created their poems? Were you thrown by the turn, or how did the poet help you into that turn? And on Twitter, you're welcome to respond to these poems too using hashtag #TeacherPoets. So Teacher Poets, I turn it to you. Any thoughts or responses to the poems that you took a look at? Oh, I also should say while you're getting ready, so our friend Jen, unfortunately, is having some speaker issues today, so Jen might just type to us, and we can say what she says. We also will be typing back to her, too. So if you notice that Jen isn't saying anything, it's because her computer decided to not work today. We're sorry about that, Jen. Okay, so any thoughts or reactions to the poems that we looked at today?
Can I start by chiming in about Daddy Dozens?
Sure.
One of the things that surprised me about that turn was that I was really surprised in the end of the poem myself to find out that the father seems to be a doctor or a medic or something like that. You know, that is not what I was expecting from the beginning of the poem. At the beginning there was a lot of home images and Tyra Banks' kind of popular culture images, and then towards the end of the poem, like, you know, single ladies and dancing in the hallway, and then this kind of, you know, oh, he's got a pager and he's got a cell phone and he's smart, and that was surprising to me. I thought she really played well with our expectations in the poem. What did we expect, given the language and so on? I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I love that point of how it's like both the insults that she's throwing and the kind of like situation she's creating, you could think, well, he's a big dum-dum, like that's kind of what's going on here. And then you're right, it's it's those many layers of surprise that come in. That you're like, now I know something about the dad that I didn't know. Now I know something about this family that I didn't know. Oh man, now I know something about his work life versus family life that I didn't know before. So yeah, I love that. Any other thoughts?
I can chime in on that poem also. One of the things I really enjoyed about it was the fact that there's this like enormous portion that's about the head and the smart, and that seems to be like the most important part, or you think it is while you're reading the poem. And then we have this shorter stanza that then becomes more powerful, and then the last line, which is separated from everything, which is the most powerful part, is the smallest part of the poem. So I thought that was a really cool way to structure the poem. And I mean, I felt so much weight at the end of this, just on this one line. Like, oh my goodness, I didn't know we were coming to this point.
Yeah, I agree too. And I haven't thought about that, of how, as we're working on our own poems too, so maybe this is something to steal, we can think about space and length. We talked about last time, one of you agreed with me, maybe not everybody, but like I'm obsessed with like order in a poem. Like I like when I kind of understand, okay, we're now in couplets, or I get that there's like 3-line stanzas and then 1 line. But I think this is a good invitation to think how the amount of time we spend on something can also lead our readers in different directions. Yeah, I love that. How about one more thought on any of the poems, and then we'll move ahead to our strategy for today. Oh, and by the way, I can also add, not only is Jen's mic not working so well, but poor Sue has laryngitis. So you're welcome to squeak your answer, or you also can type it, and we can say it for you too. We have lots of love here. Maybe not a lot of audio, but we have lots of love here at Teacher Poets. So any other thoughts about the poems today? I'm just typing to Jen, who can't hear us. Okay, so we'll move ahead. Teacher Poets, you can type updates, because I just realized I forgot to tell Jen what we're doing now. So now we'll move over to our strategy for today. So having these things in mind, thinking about the turns that poets are taking in their poems, I'd like to do a writing strategy with us that can help us think about turns and can help us work along. Oh, good, Jen can hear us. Good. That can help us think about turns in our own poems, ways that we might organize those. And so one thing about strategies that we use in writing is that they aren't things we have to do all the time, but they are things that can help us as we're planning or as we're writing, or help us make some decisions about what we'll do next. So I'd like to share one strategy with you, and I'll invite you to try it out. Again, those of you watching online, we'll invite you to use the hashtag #TeacherPoets to write along with us. Carol is just shouting you out, Betsy. She's like, great to see you, Betsy. So Carol's along with us too here. So let's think about turns. And so one way that we can think about turns in our poems, for sure, turns come up as we're just writing. You know, you start writing and then you find something surprising that you didn't think of before. You're kind of like, you discover an emotion you didn't think you had, or a place you didn't think you remembered. So for sure, those turns can come up while we're writing. But what I'd like us to experiment with today is to really purposefully create some turns, so to make some plans in advance of where we might want to go. So what I'm going to share with you is something that I think about not just in poems, but I like to do this with narrative writing as well. And while in Teacher Poets we're mostly thinking about ourselves as adult poets, I will say I do share this with students too, and I like it a lot. So one kind of a turn we can make is an emotional turn, where we feel one way in the beginning and then we feel something different later. So a way that we can do that is to literally plan for what's the beginning and what's the end. So I've been working on this poem about doing homework with my daughter, and so I can think about some ways that I feel, and one place that's really powerful is to think about the end first, to say, where do I think I want to end, and then I can plan backwards from there. So for example, one thing that I would like to end in the poem is something like being more forgiving. And maybe that's forgiving for her, or maybe that's forgiving for myself, but being more forgiving. So if I'm going to develop forgiving at the end, I can ask myself, what could I do at the beginning that is opposite from that, or maybe removed from that, a little different from that? So opposite of forgiving is probably something like frustrated or mad or upset. So that might be opposite. I could do the same thing, however, in reverse. So I could say, I'm sitting down to write this poem where I'm feeling mad and frustrated with how my daughter does her homework. But then I think that's not really where I want to live. Like, I don't like that feeling. I reflect on that. I'm like, oh, I don't like how that feels. So then I could say, well, what could an opposite place be that I want to get to? So it might be that at the end, maybe I'm mad and frustrated with myself. So one thing we can do with turns is to either start at the end or start at the beginning, and then think about what could an opposite emotion be, like here we went backwards, or what could a different maybe subject of where our emotions is going, what could that be? So that's one way to plan, and so you could think about that. Another way to plan some turns is to think visually. So to think, what kind of like visual journey, almost like a movie, are we taking our readers on? Like, we want to bring them to different places. I'm reminded of both Leanne and Sue's poems from last week that both had a very like visual element to them. So like we're like watching this boy as he's reading, and we could really see him. Or with Sue's, there's that moment where we're with the crab and we're like kind of out on the sound, and those were like surprising visual turns. Like, now we're somewhere new. So we could plan visual turns. We could decide where are places that we want to take our readers, and legitimately stop and think about those. So I could think, I know at the start of my poem with the quarters, I'm at home, but now I could plan ahead for where are some places that we might go together. So last week with the strategy we used, I came up with like having a ship. So maybe we're on the ship together. Then I could think, should we go back home again? Or maybe there's somewhere else to go. Like maybe we're at the park together, or maybe there's like a flashback. Like I kind of like that. Like maybe we're at home doing homework, we have this ship metaphor, and then maybe I have a flashback to myself doing homework. So maybe I go back in time to when I was young. So I can plan ahead for these. So when I'm planning my turns out, and again, in the process of writing, you'll discover, you'll change things will kind of grow as you go. But when I'm planning my turns out in advance, it helps me as a writer kind of go in a direction. What it also does is it helps me prepare ahead of time for where we're going to end up. I think the hard thing with some turns, and this came up a lot last week, is that in a way the poem has to kind of like own and be ready for that turn or that phrase. Like, the poem has to like help your reader get there. You have to basically earn it through your writing. The hard thing is when there's a turn or a line that seems to come out of nowhere. And what I love about the mentor poems that we read is they all seem to really help you get to that place. Like the Daddy Dozens was really surprising, but she didn't just out of nowhere say, and my dad works too hard. Like, it didn't just show up that way. It was like she led us through to that point. So by planning ahead, it can help us give some clues early on to where we might be going. So now if we jump to some writing, and I'd like to invite those of you online and those of you Twitter poets that are here too to start trying this out. I'm going to do this live with you, but I'd love for you to try it out too, to think about either a poem you are working on or maybe one that you haven't started writing yet, and to just plan a couple of like, what could some possible turns be? So for me, I think I want to use while I do get mad at myself, I think maybe I want to try to be more forgiving. So I think I'll think about this turn where I'm going to start out frustrated and then become more forgiving, but I'm going to also try to hold on to these visuals too. So as I'm writing, I'll try to move across both. So for the sake of our time here today, I've started one which I'm trying to do these things, and there's still a lot more that needs to be done. So I started the same way I've always done before, where here we are together. I'm annoyed. I'm trying to be clear. I get so annoyed when my daughter does her math homework. It is a ship we board at too late at night, and the waves begin to roil. No matter how many passengers introduce themselves, how many plus signs wave their stubby arms, quarters bow to her, numbers say their names, she just can't remember. So as I'm looking back at my plan, one thing I'm thinking about is visually I moved to the ship really quickly, and maybe that's okay for my poem, but maybe I want to go back and see if I can make this home more visual. Like, I didn't really help you see the home so much. I just kind of said it and moved on. So planning that turn, it might help if I did that. So I might go back and work that in. If I check this plan, frustrated to forgiving, I think I'm showing you some ways that I'm feeling frustrated, although maybe not enough. Like, I think maybe I'm setting up more just that, like, she can't remember. So I might want to add in more of that to really show how frustrated we are. So if we came back in and revised this, I might say, let's see, we board the ship too late at night. Maybe I want to add things like, I am tired and just want to sleep. Or maybe to show frustrated more, like passengers introduce themselves. Maybe somewhere in here I need to add things like, I repeat their names over and over, and she doesn't seem to get them. So I'm going to really build up that frustrated feeling, so when we move towards forgiving, that turn is even clearer. It even feels like a bigger shift. I'm not fit to captain, too hard with the steering, and not familiar with the dials. With an iceberg ahead, I do not call for backup, just pick up loathsome steam. The hardest is when she cries. Then I am back in third grade, times tables, failure, on my own faulty course, to a country I never land on, and then I have some more that I want to work on there. So by planning out some turns early on, it can help us guide our readers towards the places that we're trying to get to. If I really emphasize frustrated in the beginning, the shift to being more forgiving will be clearer and more meaningful. Again, I think going back to Daddy Dozens that was mentioned earlier, that she really helped you live with this like Daddy's a dope, Daddy's dope, Daddy's frustrated for a while. So when she shifted to how much she cares about him and how smart she thinks she is, that becomes big. So then when she shifts to, but I don't think I see him enough, like each one of those are more meaningful because the step before it was larger. So teacher poets, and those of you on Twitter, I see a bunch of you jumping in too. I'd love if you could share some turns that you're planning. And Jen, I think I may have heard sound from you. I'm not sure. It might actually be working now. You could give it a shot if you'd like. And Sue, feel free to type. Those of you online, if you can use hashtag teacherpoets, you can share along with us too. So I turn it to you, my teacher poet friends. What are some turns that you're considering with poems that you're working on or trying to work on?
Can I start talking about my boy age 10 from last week? A couple of things that occurred to me while you were speaking and following on from some of the comments from last week is that a visual turn, well, first of all, an emotional turn that I might make is going from happiness to sadness, this idea of I'm happy that he's still for a moment and I have a chance to watch him and enjoy his company, and then moving towards the end being sad that, that he's not going to stay, that he's growing up and going away. But then it also occurred to me that I could use, instead of having the sadness come because he's going, have the sadness that if I keep him, somebody mentioned that I could, that idea of it's the mother holding him, that if I keep him there, he's not going to grow up the way he should be, and almost like a guilty feeling of wanting to keep him there. And then a visual turn that I might make could be, another comment that was made was that I didn't establish where he was. And where he actually was was on a couch inside, sitting beside,
oh, wow,
open out. So I thought I could have that visual turn from the inside to the outside, looking out the window, and then maybe free him,
right,
towards the end. So
right.
that's some things that occurred to me as you were speaking.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I love that. I see a lot of us are nodding our heads of that, just like really building up the visuals around those. That would be so awesome if then like the doors open and now he's actually outside of the house. That's really cool. How about one more, if anyone from here, or I'll grab some from online too, of turns that you're playing around with. So we have two silent people in here too. Sure.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, go ahead.
Or should I, can you hear me okay, or should I type?
We can hear you. If it becomes painful, we can type too.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I was thinking about with my poem from last week was a good place to maybe the line about the building the bat cave on the wrong side of the tracks, and how I think somebody mentioned that they weren't sure where I was going with that because it sort of seemed like disconnected or not quite explained enough. So one of the things I was thinking was maybe expanding that moment a little bit, because that is a flashback of a moment between my son and my daughter in building a Lego bat cave on the wrong side of the Brio train tracks and an argument that happened. So, you know, I'm kind of thinking that that might be a place to expand a little bit more in order to show that turn a little bit better.
Yeah, and you know what's I love that example because I think it highlights some of what we're thinking about here, which is so hard to do, is I think we write for ourselves first, but then we have to think about the audience that we're writing for. So when you say Batcave, you knew all of those things. You knew it was Legos, you knew where it was, you knew that there was an argument involved, like you knew all the parts of it. And so I think that like going back and saying what are things that will be familiar to readers, what are things I have to help them with, because even your explanation right there, I can now picture what is probably a multicolored cave because of all the little Legos that are there. I can picture some pieces are around. I can picture two kids just fighting with each other. Like when you say that, it's so clear and visual to me that gives me a new understanding of the poem. So I love that. I love going back and looking at that. So for all of you online, for our teacher poets here, we invite you to think more about turns and how you're planning for those and really kind of earning the turn, like building up to it from early on in your poem so that when the turn happens, your readers really understand why it's there, and like the poems that we looked at today, they can feel surprised or engaged or kind of emotionally charged by them. So now for our end here, we'll do what I love the most about teacher poets, and that is to workshop some original poems. So we have Jancy, we'll have Jancy's poem first, and then we have Jen's poem that she's sharing with us today too. So a couple of things that we'd like you to do, and I also realize I have to grab a copy of your poem. Here it is. So a couple of things that we'd like you to do online is to prepare for compliments, questions, and considerations. And you can go ahead and even get those ready in your tweets if you've had a chance to look up this poem ahead of a time. You don't even have to wait for us to get started. Once you put them there, I'll grab some up. So what we tend to do when we're workshopping, just for those of you that haven't done this with us before, is we have read the poems ahead of time. We've marked them up in those ways. And then we share as readers our feedback with the author. The author, though, is quiet. The author, during creative writing workshopping, tends to just listen and take a lot of notes. And what's important is that the author doesn't have to agree with anything that we say. In fact, we don't have to agree with each other either when we're giving feedback. The author is just able to listen to how readers are interacting with their writing. So then when they go to revise, they can make decisions about what they might want to change or what they might want to include or what they'll accept or not accept. So we move through those steps: compliments, then questions, then considerations, so that the poet has lots of things that he or she can think about as they're going back to work more on this poem, but others as well. So we also generally start with the poet reading their poem to us. So Jancy, I'm going to put your poem up here, and then we'd love for you to read it, and then we'll move into our steps together.
Okay. Deadline. The house is still asleep. I savor this quiet moment. Lingering over coffee, I tell myself I have time. I have time. But the tiny itch I feel crawling along my neck says otherwise. Making blueberry pancakes, I turn up the radio and sing along. We dance around the kitchen, and I want to be in this moment, stay in this moment. But I feel myself pulled away, drifting just out of reach like a toy swept away by the tide. Moving throughout the day, I cherish our time together. We splash and swim at the pool, and I feel light. I am carefree. Then I hear it buzzing around my head like a pesky fly that won't go away. It's still there, waiting and lurking as I tuck my daughter into bed. Anchoring down at my desk at last, I can feel it within my reach. Finally, the rope is lowered. Taking hold of it, I pull myself up to the surface.
Thank you. So now we'll start with compliments first. So these, if you're watching along online, you can tweet using hashtag #TeacherPoets, and we'll bring some of your comments in as we go. And we'll be here down together too. So we begin with compliments, things that you loved about this poem, about parts or lines or ways that it made you feel. So #TeacherPoets, I turn it over to you.
I'll start with my squeaky voice. My favorite part of the poem, I think, was the first stanza, and particularly the line where she says, I tell myself I have time, and then she repeats, I have time. Because in that moment, I kind of felt like, oftentimes when we're repeating something to ourselves, we know it's not true, but we're trying to make it believable. And so I kind of felt like I was in that moment with you. Because I could kind of identify with it. So I really like the repetition of that line there.
I like the repetition also of those bits of time, and moment. But I also liked the repetition of some of the imagery in the poem. There are a couple of different things that I noticed. One was there were a lot of water, seafaring images there that were repeated throughout that I thought were really effective. The splashing, the swimming, the rope reminded me again of a boat. And there was another moment, of course I can't find it now, drifting just out of reach like a toy swept away, lots of images of water and flowing time and so on. And the other thing I liked was the kind of creaturely nature of the deadline and how it got larger over time. So it started off as a tiny it crawling, and then later on it was a pesky fly buzzing. That's exactly what deadlines feel like to me. And then at the very end, it was almost like a monster kind of lurking behind her. So I liked the way that grew through the poem.
I agree with all of these. One thing I really loved, and I don't know why, and maybe it's because I'm hungry, but the making blueberry pancakes, that like very specific, here's what we do, or at least here's what this speaker does in this family. I loved that because it wasn't just like making breakfast. It was a very particular kind of a meal that evokes the smell of pancakes, and now I'm hungry. Jen hi, Jen. Jen's typing in, so I'll read what she said. She said she was struck by the contrast between positive and scary images or language. For example, there's the pancake scene that then goes right to a toy being swept away by the tide. Yeah, I mean, I love that you pointed that out because you're right. Now I can really see that of, we're carefree and splashing around in the pool, and then there's this fly that's ominously buzzing around, or this itch and that's crawling around. So yeah, it's this like it's both light and then kind of scary or dark. Okay, so then our next step as we're reading together is to then think about questions that we have for this poet. I should grab one from online. Sorry, here's Carol says, for a compliment, the juxtaposition of thoughts, images moving chronologically in that format. So she likes how it's like moving forward in time, but all along the way you're sticking these interesting images together. I agree with that. So our next is questions. What are questions that you have for this poet? And so they could be questions that you as a reader you want to know more about, or maybe you didn't understand a piece. And one thing we always talk about is that our questions are loving. So we're saying them in ways that support the poet, so they also know how much we appreciate what they're doing, but also they are honest. So if there's something you don't understand, tell the poet you don't understand. So that's good feedback for them. Okay, so we'll turn to questions that you had.
I can say one thing about a question I had. I also liked lots of the different lingering parts of the poem. Um, I wondered about the moving through the day. I sort of went back and forth with this question as I read it because I like how much she shares about moving through the day, and then there's times when I'd kind of like to know a little more about what she's doing as she's moving through the day. Like, when are other times that this just kind of creeps in and is, you know, scratching at her neck again or buzzing around? What are some of those other moments? Because she kind of talks about moments throughout the poem. Um, I just wonder if there's something more she could add about as she's moving through the day. When's another time it's kind of bothering her, itching at her.
And if I could add like along those same lines of wanting to know more, I don't know if anyone had this, so I'm curious to see what you think. I wanted to know more about the deadline. You know, like I imagine it's about one thing. It could have been writing this poem, or it could have been something else, and it probably could stand for other things too. And I feel like I get the idea that it's about a deadline, and I really connected to a lot of these feelings of like, but I don't really want to do it, but I have to do it. But I wonder what it was, or what the many possibilities of it could be, that I feel like for me right now as a reader, it still feels kind of vague, that it's like a mysterious deadline. I almost want to know more about it. Or I think maybe Betsy, your point, I almost want to know more about then this more about this person. So I feel like I either want one or both, but I don't know. I mean, did anyone else feel that way, or of anything related?
I didn't feel that way about the deadline. I kind of liked that it was vague. But one thing I did want to know, and I think it was answered towards the end, but I had a question as I read, was who the we was. What are the relationships? And I think it's about the daughter and the children, wanting to spend more time with the children or with the child. But I wasn't sure, particularly in the second paragraph, who that was, and I kind of wanted to hear more about the relationships that she, you know, who is it that she wants to spend the time with.
A compliment from online from earlier, Aaliyah saying, lingering over coffee, she could really relate to that beginning stanza and beginning image of the deadline through the ending image. Yeah, I think for me as well, Leah, from what you said, I do think a lot of this is like I just want to know a bit more specifics. Like I think the blueberry pancake line to me, I'm like, oh, okay, it's the morning, and it's a family or a relationship or a group that's making something together, and I feel like I just wanted to know a bit more about that. Other things. Okay, good. So let's move to considerations. So considerations are an opportunity to, I always say we can't co-write the poem with the poet. The poet, it's their poem. In this case, it's her poem. The poet gets to decide what goes into their poem, but we can offer some of our own, like if we were to write this, what we might consider. One thing that helps considerations go well and be really useful for a writer is if you make those considerations have like maybe more than one side. You can't always do that, but if for example, you say, so it could be that maybe you drop the last stanza, or maybe you add more to the first stanza. So you're giving some options for the writer to think about. One other tip is it's important to not make consideration sound like you know the answer. So like it helps to use some kind of tentative language to say, well, maybe, well, possibly, instead of saying get rid of that first line. So it invites the writer to have those considerations along with you. And again, ultimately, it's their decision. So if you're along with us online, you can use hashtag #TeacherPoets to share your considerations. Or I turn it back to you, our teacher poet friends. What are some considerations for this poem?
I'll say something. It's a bit on the same line as what Betsy was questioning earlier about the moving through the day, that third stanza, first line. And I sort of wondered if in that spot, for me, time was moving a little bit fast, where the rest of the poem was really lingering on images and things that were going on. So I was sort of wondering if, looking back at the stanza previous, where she has the image of making blueberry pancakes and dancing around the kitchen, and those seem to be two morning moments, and then that third stanza seems to have moved to the afternoon. So perhaps thinking about, besides splashing at the pool, perhaps another image that you might be able to put in there that is an afternoon image that could kind of bring us there. That was a thought I was having.
That's a great idea. Others?
one thing you might think about to try and make that movement or the movement through time a little bit clear, because one thing that I recognized was that there were some, we kind of zoom in on some moments where time stands still a little bit, like making blueberry pancakes, and then there's the sense with the next stanza moving through the day that suddenly, oh no, it's speeding up again, and maybe pulling some more contrast like that so that we have a zoom in moment and then a movement and a zoom in. And one thing I thought that might help with that is looking at some of the verbs and playing up some of that. I don't know if it's sailing imagery or water imagery, but I almost thought, oh, sailing through the day might be a nice verb there, you know, trying that idea of boats drifting and then moving and so on. I don't know, you've got a lot of water imagery, so I thought that might be something you could play up a bit.
Any final thoughts? So thank you, Jancy, very much for joining us and for sharing your poem. And we look forward to seeing the revisions that might come.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the great suggestions and feedback.
Again, this is like my favorite time of everything that we do here. So now we'll move over to Jen's poem. Jen, I'll read it for you if Mike isn't working so well, so let me pop it up here. Here we go. Okay, so here is Jen's poem, which is currently untitled. So again, if you're watching along with us, feel free to tweet #TeacherPoets, and we'll again think about compliments, questions, and then considerations. So here's Jen's currently untitled poem. Driving a dust-clouded road one morning, I stopped to watch a stilled turkey vulture, balanced on a withered, angled fence post, sunning itself in majestic silence. Its sweeping wings spanned open, a scalloped cape, displaying feathers, layered brown and white. Its garnet-stained head, featherless and stern, appeared grizzled and lined, a reddish peach pit framing obsidian stoic eyes. I admired its clevered bill, its instructable tool for gleaning virtue from forgotten cast-offs. It stood, sure in its purpose, a grand silhouette above a bowing field of bleached, wistful oat grass. I waited for its wings to take the air, to reach out and capture a thermal wind, but it remained unwavering, and I moved on, still wondering why I found him so beautiful. Okay, so we'll begin again with compliments. I'll leave this up on the screen for just a couple minutes. So compliments, teacher poets, or those of you online too, things that you love about this poem.
I'll start. I really loved the language that she was using to describe the vulture. Is it a vulture? It's a vulture. Mm-hmm. Okay. And, you know, when I think of a turkey vulture, I don't really think of anything very beautiful, but you were able to use language to make it beautiful to me. And I do have a big soft spot for metaphor. So when you said its sweeping wings spanned open a scalloped cape, that was really a favorite part for me. And its obsidian stoic eyes. So I really love the way that you use language to describe something that maybe, you know, I wouldn't have considered so beautiful before until you described it the way that you did.
I agree. I loved both of those images too. Sorry, Jancy. Do you want to
go ahead?
Okay. I'll just point out one quick thing. In addition to those images that Susanna pointed out, which I also loved, I liked what you did with sound in the poem. That really struck me. I love the sibilants, all the S's that repeat, and then the D's that repeat as well. I just thought those were kind of perfect sounds. I don't quite know why, but they struck me as being the perfect sounds to kind of throw this contrast up. The S's are kind of a beautiful, wistful sound, and then there's all these hard glottal stops with the D's and the G's and the B's. That was really neat.
Yeah, I just also loved all the detail because I don't think I've ever really looked closely at a turkey vulture before, but I felt like I could picture it very clearly and see all the beautiful imagery that was used.
I loved how slow and kind of quiet this poem was. Like, I feel like it's nice from the stressful things that I've been writing about and, like, you know, just all of our lives, that it really is this, like, here we are, we're together, we're going to look at this, and it has this, you know, it feels very pastoral, you know, it kind of like feels like William Carlos Williams or someone, like like describing this moment in time, and I mean it's like this ode to a turkey vulture, but as everyone said, it's done in this like really beautiful, like respectful, thoughtful way that I just love the slowness of it.
Another thing that just occurred to me is that I like the way you describe the beauty, in that you don't try and reach for things that are beautiful about the turkey vulture, but what you're describing really is its strength. They're all very strong images. They're not beautiful images, but you get the idea of beauty and strength from them. So I like the way it's not sentimental, it's very, very straightforward.
So now let's move to questions. So things that you, as a reader, were wondering about this poem. They could be questions for lines or ideas or parts. So questions.
One of the questions I had, a compliment too, I liked the forgotten cast-offs part of that, for gleaning virtue from forgotten cast-offs, and it made me kind of go back to the eyes, and I feel like I need to know more about the eyes. I'm wondering, where are they looking, and what are they so stoically looking at? Are they looking past you, like you're forgotten as well? Like, I felt like there was so much description of everything, and then we get to the eyes, and even though that's very powerful description of the eyes, I felt a little bit like, is there, what's it looking at, you know?
Yeah, I think I agree with that too. I think even more largely, I'm not sure how I should be reading the idea of this poem. You know, like I'm not sure if I should.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Yep, yeah, perfect. Although now it's too late because now you have to be quiet.
Now this is so weird.
Yeah,
so
but
I really, this was originally a sonnet.
Okay, well, wait. You
And
have
so
to.
I
Wait,
was
wait,
trying
wait,
to.
wait, wait. I'm muting you, Jen. I just muted you because as a poet, you can't share. I muted you. You can't share now. Okay, sorry, Jen. Jen doesn't know that I muted her, but I did. Save comments for later. You're muted. Poor Jen doesn't know that she's muted. Okay, I'm going to continue on. So one thing that I was wondering about is what direction it's going in, like what we're supposed to be thinking. And Jen, just take notes. No need to defend. So we, which happens in our groups too. Like I feel like it's reaching for a metaphor that I think starts to come out in lines like virtue of forgotten cast-offs, or like it stood in purpose. But I feel like I almost want some more to know what I should be thinking about. At the same time, it also could just be like an ode, you know, and then maybe the larger point is just living inside of the beautiful language that's there. But I feel like I want a little bit more direction, and like, is there a comparison being made here? Is there something I should be drawn to? And I would love to see more of that throughout. Any other questions to add in? Okay, so then let's move to consideration. So things that this poet could consider and think about and hold in mind as she's moving forward.
I have a question and a consideration at the same time, and it was sort of related to what you just said, Chris. Early in the poem, she's sort of describing the vulture quite in depth, which I loved. And then at the end, you know, she says, and I moved on, and I kind of wondered about that moving on, and I wondered if there was more to the poem. You know, is the beginning part, you know, should it stand on its own, or is it part of a larger poem? And would there be more about the moving on that I'm wondering about? What was going on there? So I kind of wonder if she could kind of maybe add on. So either keep it as a description of the vulture, or kind of move it into more of a narrative at the end about that moving on piece.
That is a neat idea, of that maybe it's like this is a piece of something else. Like maybe there's like this section and another. I mean, I'm so drawn to her language that I feel like any other part that's attached to this first one, the language is going to be equally amazing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Other considerations?
I actually wondered if there might be an idea of taking out some of, this is kind of completely contradictory to what Chris just said, so it's kind of,
Sorry.
but I liked the description that was just plain description, and then there were words like wistful and withered, which I felt almost told me what I should think, and I was getting the idea so strongly from the description itself. I didn't really want that word wistful. I felt wistful already hearing that the oat grass was bleached. Do you know what I mean? I thought that was strong enough in itself without giving me wistful too. And the same thing with the last line, still wondering why I found him so beautiful. As a reader, I was already wondering that myself. I was thinking, why am I finding this turkey vulture beautiful? And when it came to that last line, I didn't really want the poet to just kind of hand me that question or that, that answer to the poem. I just wanted to be left with it in a sense. So I wondered if maybe there were places where you could almost be less directive. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no, but actually I don't disagree with that at all. I think being directive is more like we're looking at a turkey vulture. Like I think we had to know that. Had that not come out, we'd be like, what is this thing we're looking at? So I think it's this balance between we have to help our readers know where we are, but then we can take them on a journey. And I actually do agree with you. I do think that some of those, like, I mean, I personally like the last line because it is like confirming something I'm thinking too. So I like that in movies and TV shows when it's like it happens and like, aha, I knew that. But I do think there are other places, like you said, like wistful. Maybe you don't have to tell us that it's wistful. We just feel that it's wistful, and so it might be going back and reading to find places where you could show, not tell. You could show us a little bit more than what you're saying. So I actually agree with that. I do think it's more of a balance. Any other thoughts? We have Carol, a couple of people that have come in. Carol saying a vivid description of language is really holding the reader in the second one. We agree with that too. We really love the language that's there. Thank you, Jen. I don't know if you can hear us. Poor Jen, her sound's coming in and out. She was typing. She said, I jumped in because I couldn't hear anyone. I wasn't really sure what was going on. So thanks for the attempt there. The good news is it's archived, so Jen is planning to then hear what we actually said later when she can hear it. I just want to say thank you to all of you who are watching along with us, and especially thank you to our teacher poet friends that are here too. I love that we could take a break in our busy, insane schedules this time of the year to write and to read and to comment together. I also want to thank you for, with the amount of love and care that you've put into each of these workshopping sessions and your support of one another. So thank you, teacher poets that are here, and thank you to everyone who's online as well too. To end here, there's this. We invite you to continue some of your own writing, so you could think about turns today. And as you're writing, your main assignment for next time is you can share some of your own favorite mentor poems and also share some of your own original work at our Teacher Poets community page. So we invite you to continue to post there, to share some of your drafts. We'd love to hear, Jancy and Jen, how your poems are changing. Please feel free to share those too. So thank you, Teacher Poets. Thank you, everyone online, and those of you that are here too. And just before we go, some previews of the upcoming sessions at our Ed Collab gathering today. So in session 2, beginning in just a few minutes at noon, workshop number 4, Kathy Collins and Matt Glover are sharing work from their new book, I Am Reading. Catherine Hale and her 5th grade buddies, her students, will be talking about work they've done with iTunes University, and her kiddos are super cute and totally on it. And so that's workshop 5. That's great for upper elementary and middle school. And then session 6 is a panel discussion with great leaders from across the country. Heather Rocco will be organizing that session, and Tony Sinanis, Janice Schwartz, John Fritzke, Ross LeBrun will all be joining in to talk about tackling leadership challenges with joy. And that's great for grades K through 12. It's a good cross-section of leaders that are there. And as a reminder, please do consider donating even some coffee money or meal money or conference registration money, whatever you'd like to share with the Boundless Readers Organization, our adopted charity for today. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Teacher Poets. I'm sad.
Thank you.
We've had such a good time together, and now we need to say goodbye. But I look forward to staying connected with all of you, and especially please do share the upcoming drafts of your poems. So thank you, everyone, joining us here during the EdCollab gathering today. Have fun the rest of your afternoon, and I look forward to seeing all of your great tweets and connecting as we go forward. Have a great day, everybody.